This is Radpod, a podcast produced by ASMIRT, the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy. ASMIRT acknowledges the Bunurong people as the traditional owners of the land from which we record this podcast and pays respect to elders past and present. Hello, I'm Steve Lacey and I'm the Director of Education for ASMIRT. Now, most of our listeners would, at some stage in their career, have done some sort of research. And this could be as simple as informal research, such as trying out a new technique or conducting a small survey of patients or colleagues, or it could be a full-blown research project that yields good results. But one thing is for sure, what is considered best practice in the work that we do is generally born from an evidence base coming out of literature. And this is determined based on the research that you do. So have you ever thought to yourself, I've got an idea for research, but I really don't know where to start? Or maybe you're already doing some research, but you haven't really thought about submitting it for publication. Well, today I'm joined by Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Medical Radiation Sciences, or the JMRS, Cherry Agustin, as well as Elizabeth Brown, who is the current chair of the ASMIRT Research Committee. Cherry and Elizabeth have come to Radpod to talk about how you can turn your idea into research and to publish it. So welcome to the show, Cherry and Elizabeth.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here.
Wonderful. Now, before we start, full disclosure here that we're actually recording this podcast during the Hobart conference in 2026. And so why would that be significant? And that's because most of the presentations that you'll see have come from research that people are doing in their own departments. Now, Cherry, how great is it to see so much research being done and presented at something like this?
Oh, it's fantastic to see so many research and quality improvement studies. The problem is most of these oral and poster presentations do not end up in peer-reviewed journals.
And why do you think that might be?
Well, most people say that they do not have the time to write. And I agree with that. There's also the misconceptions how difficult it is to publish.
And that's where you two obviously come into this podcast, because we want to give everyone here some tips and tricks on getting your research published and giving you the confidence to do so. Elizabeth, why do people do research that should be published?
Well, we're all driven by the fact we want our patients to have the best outcomes that they can. And I think we come here to share our experiences here at ASMIRT by presentation, but by publication, it's more than just impacting the people that are here at the conference. It's being able to have that wider impact and potentially change practice both here in Australia and beyond our borders, which is a fabulous opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, you can often present at a conference and someone might see a presentation at a conference and just go, oh yeah, that was a good presentation. And then kind of think a couple of years later, I know I wouldn't mind implementing that into my practice, but I can't remember what that presentation exactly was about. So because presenting at a conference means that you can only get those in the room to see what research you've done, but publishing it, of course, means that everyone gets to see it. So let's talk about how to put that research into a publication. So let's say I've got an idea for something that I want to research and to eventually publish. What is it that I need to think about, Cherry?
Well, first of all, conduct literature review just to make sure that no one hasn't done it before. And then begin the discussion of who should be part of that group, that research team, who should be an author.
Okay, and why is that important?
Well, it is important to discuss authorship as early as possible so you know each of the roles and responsibilities of each of the research team members.
Yep.
So the primary investigator is usually the first author.
Yep.
And the last author is usually the mentor or the research supervisor. Now, according to the ICMJE, or the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, authors must have contribution to 4 of these roles. So the first role is the conception or design, or the data collection, analysis, or interpretation.
Yeah.
Role number 2, drafting the work or reviewing it critically. Role number 3, final approval of the version to be published. And role number 4, agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work. So that contributors that do not perform all of these 4 roles must appear under acknowledgement.
So now the JMRS is the official journal of ASMIRT and of the NZSMIRT. So naturally we just want everyone to publish with JMRS, but not all content is suitable specifically to this journal, right? I mean, I know that in the past I've seen some papers that have been presented to JMRS and the feedback that's come back is this is probably not the journal that you should be submitting it to.
That's correct. You have to think about who your target audience is. Then think about which journal you should be publishing to.
And so each journal will have their own submission guidelines, is that right?
That's correct. So each publisher will have their own different styles that they offer. And then, of course, different journals will have different word limits. They will also have different types of papers that they offer.
Yeah. Now, Elizabeth, I assume that to publish research, you'll need ethics approval. Does that happen every time before you start?
In most cases, yes, it should. Even if it's a quality improvement project, you may go through a lesser ethics pathway, but to present it and publish it, you will generally need some level of ethical approval. That's important to consider when you're looking to go down the publication path.
Yeah. I do wonder whether that's one of the big reasons as to why people are reluctant to do research is because that ethics process can be quite daunting, particularly if you've never done it before. Where do you start with this kind of whole ethics thing? Where should people look at in order to make sure that the process is as smooth as possible?
Yeah, the ASMIRT Research Committee have actually done a really great segment on ethics that you can find in the member section on the ASMIRT website that gives you some introduction to the ethics process generally. But I'd also really recommend people to actually approach their local institution ethics committees. They are actually not scary people. They are there to help. And every different place has slightly different ways of going about ethics. So I would really advise touching base with them, giving them the name of your project or what you're about to do and asking them for advice on the best way forward, because that's going to ultimately the thing that saves you time and makes the process as smooth as it possibly can be.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I guess if you're working in a hospital, you're probably just better off trying to approach them or looking on the website to see what's actually in there as well. What about if you work for a workplace that doesn't have an ethics committee attached to it? So I'm talking like someone working in a small private clinic or something like that, saying, I want to do some research, but I've got no access to ethics. So what do they do?
Certainly reach out to the ASMIRT Research Committee and we can certainly put you in touch with people that can help. Our academic institutions are also great resources for this. They do have their own ethics committee. And I know many of them are very willing to help, particularly those smaller areas that don't have that research support. So if you know of your local university or academic institution, I would also reach out to them to support you through that ethics process.
How do they contact the ASMIRT Research Committee?
Well, we have an email address, which is research1@asmirtcommittee.org. So please reach out to us or just reach out to ASMIRT themselves and they will certainly put you in touch with us. They have all our contact details and all of us are generally at some kind of ASMIRT event in some way, shape or form. So please, we're really more than happy to talk research with anybody that's keen, interested and wants to know more.
Okay, so now I've gone through the ethics process. I've done my research. So now I obviously need to write the paper itself. Cherry, before someone begins to write their paper, what should they do?
I highly encourage you to read the articles published in the journal that you're going to be submitting your manuscript to, just to make sure that you've got the right target audience. Now, if the authors feel that they have lots of data and are considering publishing in multiple articles, check that the authors are not producing salami publication. So salami publication is when the results are split or sliced. Each published article has the same study objectives and the same study's participants, but contain different results. Now, this is considered poor practice. Also, before submitting, check that all essential items are in that report or in that manuscript. I highly suggest to look at the JMRS, for example, JMRS author guideline, and you will find the reporting guidelines over there. Now, before submitting, I highly suggest to get someone outside from your research team to read your manuscript. Also, one last thing, check that others can find your article. Check that you're in compliance with search engine optimization.
So what are some ways to do the search engine optimization?
Well, pretend you're the reader. What are the phrases or words that your readers will use to look for your work online? Create a list and then check whether those words or phrases appear in a title and abstract. I just have to remind you also to help others find your work by promoting your publication in multiple online sources, such as social media and institutional websites.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start going down a path now that I think that most listeners will want to hear about because it's something that's very topical at the moment and that people are starting to use AI to help write up their papers. And in fact, a couple of days ago, I was in a group of people and we were talking about, I think it was just an article on clinical education and someone popped into ChatGPT. I want to do an article on clinical education for JMRS. Write me a 3,000 word article or whatever, and it popped it out straight away. So that's obviously going to be a big effect. And I'll admit that I've used AI to help me write some of my abstracts and that kind of stuff before as well. What are your thoughts on using AI for this type of stuff?
Well, first of all, be transparent at all times. You cannot use AI to create false data. That's a big no-no. Now, if you used AI described in the manuscript, So if you used AI in your data analysis, data collection, or even helping you create your figures, then mention that under the methods heading.
Yeah, okay.
Now, if you used AI during the writing process, describe that under acknowledgement. Just remember to be transparent at all times.
Yeah, because otherwise you'll get found out, right?
It's much, much better for you to disclose it than the editors or the reviewers asking that the work that you've produced is not yours.
Yeah, okay. So you've written up your paper. You think that you're ready to submit. What's the process here for submission?
Like Cherry would have said earlier, you've got to read the author guidelines of the journal that you're about to submit to. That's going to really guide everything that you need to submit into that journal. And they're there to help you. That's what those author guidelines are there for.
Yeah.
Once you've gone through and filled out that checklist and ensured you've got everything in the right place and you've got everything they need, then go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I think you get to that point and you just got to hit that submit button and trust the process and know the work that you've done, people want to hear about. And the way to do that is by publication.
Yeah, okay. And then what's the process after submission? Because I know that sometimes it feels like it's taken forever. You kind of think, oh, it's probably just sitting on someone's desk waiting for someone to actually look at it and do something about it. But that's not really what's happening though, is it? What's actually happening there, Cherry?
Well, a lot of things are happening behind the scene. The editorial office look at your submission. They check that all the items that are supposedly have been entered in the actual form has been completed.
Yeah.
Also, we check for plagiarism. Then, once the editorial office do their checks, it just goes to the editors. So we've got the editor-in-chief, the deputy editor, and the associate editor. We basically look for whether or not your manuscript falls within our aims and scope. Then we check whether or not your manuscript is of good quality. If it falls outside the aims and scope of the journal, or if it's deemed poor quality, it will not progress to peer review. So when your manuscript proceeds to peer review, content experts from our region and overseas are then invited to look at your manuscript.
So the reviewers themselves, are they always specific to the discipline that the paper is applicable to?
No, not always. We can invite, for example, a biostatistician to look at the statistics.
Yeah.
We may even consider inviting an expert in your study methodology, or we might even consider inviting someone completely outside the profession, like a psychologist.
Yeah. Okay. And how many reviewers do you use per paper?
Usually about 2.
Yeah.
However, it could be more.
Okay. And how long are they given to review the papers?
Usually about 3 weeks.
Okay. So from my experience, I'm sure that experience of all the listeners who have submitted for our publication, it would be very rare to get that paper accepted the first time. And on top of that, I think that sometimes I feel that reviewer comments aren't necessarily helpful. And I guess it's hard to kind of, answer those review comments and that. And so how do we go about that situation?
We're only human, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all open to interpretation, and you have to keep that in mind.
I think too, Steve, the thing is to remember the reviewers are actually on your side.
And as a reader, the intended meaning, your intended meaning may not necessarily be what we're interpreting. So consider the feedback that we're providing when we're making clarifications about the phrasing.
Yeah.
And so consider making the amendments. However, if, for example, you're in disagreement with the reviewer's comments, you're allowed to disagree. However, you have to provide a justification for why the reporting of your methodology should not change.
Yeah.
Why, for example, the way you report your results should not change.
Yeah, the purpose of review is to try and make that paper the best it can be so that its message can spread as wide and as clearly as it can.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that one. And so we often refer to things like minor and major revisions. What's the difference between the two of those?
You know it's minor revision when you turn around. It's usually about a month.
Yeah.
And minor revision is usually clarification, changing of the phrasing, just to improve the readability. While major revision is about 2 months turnaround, and we might ask the authors to conduct further literature review. We might also ask the authors, for example, to consider presenting their results in another way, maybe perhaps seeking assistance from a statistician and look at the way the results were analyzed.
Yeah. And once it's finally gone through all the revisions, finally gets accepted, what's the next steps then?
Oh, please celebrate.
Yeah.
You have to give yourself a big pat at the back.
Yeah.
Acknowledge a job well done. And the publisher will then send you a copyright and licensing agreement form. Now, there are lots of unfamiliar words on this document. I highly encourage authors to go back to the JMRS guideline, look at the copyright and licensing section and understand the words and phrases that are appearing in the document you're about to sign. You will then receive a copy edited proof for you to edit and approve. Immediately thereafter, your article will then appear in early view in Wiley Online Library, where anyone can then cite your article.
Yeah.
Then lastly, I would highly encourage the authors to start promoting. Often people forget that promoting is part of their role. It is important to widen your readership beyond your friends, promote in social media, update your institutional website.
Yeah. So one thing that catches people out sometimes is some of the journals actually charge people to submit, and some of those costs can be quite significant as well. What's the JMRS process?
ASMIRT and NZIMR members can publish at JMRS for free. This then means that your publication as an open access journal can be cited, can be read by anyone in the world. It could be a fellow healthcare professional. It could be members of the public. Open access journals, I believe, can have a far better readership than a subscription-only model.
And do all the authors have to be ASMIRT or NZIMRT members?
Just one member.
Just one of them. And does it have to? And is that the person who's submitting that has to be?
You don't need to be the corresponding author. You don't even have to be the first author.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, what if someone has already done some research without the intention to publish, and now after listening to this podcast, they're like, "Oh, actually, I did some research before, and I actually might want to publish this." How can they ensure that the right steps have been followed now?
So the first step is to make sure you've got the appropriate ethic approval. And hopefully if you've done research, even if you, without the intention to publish, you will have already navigated that landscape to actually have conducted the research.
Yeah.
But then start having a look at the right journal and have a read of articles that are published in that journal. So looking at JMRS, then have a read of some of the similar articles in JMRS, and that will give you a good feel of how they're written, what kind of structure that they are written in to give you that confidence. And then I would start putting it together using the resources again on the ASMIRT Research members website. There's some great resources on how to write, but really read those similar articles to help you put that together. Get some people around you that can read it and maybe, do that check that you're making sense in what you're putting forward and go and publish. It's such a fantastic experience. It's not always the easiest experience, but you do learn a lot out of it, and you have that great reward of benefiting to the wider profession.
Can you get retrospective ethics approval for some of the research that you've done if you didn't go down that path to begin with?
It depends on the research that you conducted. Certainly some of the quality assurance or audit type retrospective studies, absolutely you can. Something that's done prospectively, obviously you might have to rethink how you might start that project again or do an ongoing phase of it that you can get the ethic approval at the beginning of the process.
Yeah. Okay. Look, this is all great. Thank you both for joining me in today's podcast. There's a bit to take in about publishing, and we could make about 5 podcasts on this topic, I think, because there's so many different steps along the way. One thing I just want to ask is kind of before we finish off, and that is often I find that some people might also be reluctant because of the process it is from the journal side in terms of the journal submission guidelines, in terms of how far that's kind of come through. And sometimes we might submit to, say, JMRS, and it comes back to us a few times to say, oh, you missed this point, you missed that point, and things like that. How can that kind of stuff be avoided?
I think reading the author guidelines as a start is always the best place to go. Another piece of great advice I received from someone was actually when you're involved in your own research, you sometimes add in your own words or you interpret things because you're in it. You know exactly what you've done and you understand what you've done, and you don't always realize that how you've explained it or how you've written it may not make sense to someone else. So one of the best pieces of advice I got is find a trusted colleague that hasn't been involved in your project or your research and get them to read it over and see if they can actually understand what you're trying to get across. Yeah. And a lot of the time that will help with some of those reviewer comments because you're getting an outside point of view into how you've written it and how you've explained what you've done and your results and your conclusions. So I think that's a really great tip in trying to navigate and get in front of some of those reviewer comments that you'll sometimes get it back.
Yeah, great. Do you guys have any final tips for any of the listeners about what they should consider when they're submitting?
Be open to feedback. It's important to know that the reviewers do represent the target audience of that journal. Use reporting guideline. That's the only way I think that you will check that every single item in that manuscript are all completed. Oh, one more thing before I forget. Yeah. We have the webinar, peer review seminar series. Yeah. And previous webinars can now be accessed for free on the JMRS website in Wiley Online Library. And then, of course, every single year, we host the JMRS Publications Workshop at ASMIRT. So if you missed this year's workshop, please join us in future years to come.
Great. Thank you. And what about you, Elizabeth? Any final tips from you?
I think my main tip would be to go ahead and do it, because if you have asked that question in your own workplace and wanted to find an answer and couldn't find it by searching the current literature, then you're the person to go and answer that for somebody else.
Yeah.
So take the leap. And we can get very vulnerable, I think, in this process about sharing what we've done. But like I said, if you're asking the question, I guarantee there's somebody else around that's doing it. So you can be the person to answer that question for someone else.
Yeah, it's very rare now that someone asks a question that hasn't been asked in the past already. So great, that's wonderful. Thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Radpod, a podcast produced by the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy.